I think if you would ask different priests, deacons, even bishops, how we prepare for the Sunday homily, you probably get lots of different responses. Right? And certainly that is something that's important. It's obviously a focus of our week. Sometimes our weeks can be crazy and we not get as much time as we want. Normally what I do is on Monday I will look at the upcoming readings for the next Sunday and then try to let that kind of percolate a little bit during the course of the week and then get some ideas together of what I want said. But this week has been very strange, not only because it was quite busy, but because at first things were not really happening the way they normally do. What was occurring, however, was this one particular event, one particular story, kept kind of hitting me over and over and over again each and every day. And so while at first it was not something I necessarily wanted to talk about, I was very much convicted that it needed to be addressed and connected with the gospel, because I think there is a connection. Now, some of you may have not heard about this particular incident because it really wasn't covered at all by the national news, or only in a limited fashion. But last week, down in Wilson, North Carolina, a little 5-year-old boy, Canon Hinnant, was outside in the street riding his, I can't remember if it's a tricycle or a bicycle, but while he was doing that, a neighbor came out of the house, ran towards him, and shot him execution style. Awful thing. But again, it was not really covered by the national press. And they buried Canon yesterday, and his father, of course, described what it's like, holding your son in your arms as you wait and hope for an ambulance to come. Very different, obviously, from the reaction that we saw from George Floyd's death in Minneapolis a few weeks back. And I think there's a connection, and not in a political way, because one of the fundamental things that we have to remember is that every single human life is beloved of God. Regardless of how the person lives, regardless of what the person's state is in life, what kind of job they have, all of that is superfluous. God simply loves because that's who He is, and He created us in love. And while some would reduce everything to a racial issue, because obviously George Floyd was African American. In the case of Canon Hinnant, he was a white child who was murdered by a black man. It comes down to something far more important. And I've said this before, the problem in our country is not a problem of race. The problem in our country is a God problem, not a race problem. We've excluded God from the public square. There's been an attempt to isolate God within the four walls of the churches and to abandon any reference to Him in a meaningful way in the public square. And we see the results of that. We see the destruction of the family. We see the attacks on religious freedom, on basic human rights. And we see that time and time again. And what is underscored in the gospel today, and again, this is probably a shocking gospel on some level because of the way Jesus speaks, but when we look deeper into the gospel, it's giving us a very important message, and one that is very, very necessary now. Because we have Jesus and the disciples up in the area of Tyre and Sidon. It's the north of Judea. And it's primarily a Gentile territory. So not a lot of Jewish folks in the area of Tyre and Sidon. And we're told that a Canaanite woman, so a non-Jew, a pagan, continued to call out after Jesus. "Have pity on me, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." And we're told in the gospel that Jesus didn't say a word in answer to her. So much so that the disciples started saying, "Send her away, for she keeps calling after us. She's bothering us. She's interrupting what we want to do. Send her away." So Jesus turns and says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did him homage, saying, "Lord, help me." And then the really shocking statement from Jesus. He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." It's helpful to understand kind of the background, the relationship between the Canaanites and the Jews, really any non-Jews, with the Jewish people, the Jewish state, was one often of tension. There was an inherent racism and opposition, right, to anyone who was not of the culture and not of the people. Jesus is aware of that. And he's also aware that it was probably lurking in the hearts of his disciples. So one of the commentators points out that by his saying this in a very clear way, he was drawing out what was already in the hearts of some of the apostles and some of those who were there with Jesus. And he uses it as a means of showing something important, because the woman's reply, not being at all dissuaded from her desire to have the Lord, this man who she knew was Jewish, but she also knew there was something about him that was different. She'd heard the stories, and she was at the end of her rope. She wanted to have her daughter healed, and so her response was truly beautiful. "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." And then Jesus' reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And she was held up as an example of faith. This woman who some in the crowd would have seen as no better than a dog. And Jesus holds her up as an example of perseverance, as an example of faith. Throughout human history, there has obviously been various prejudices, various mistreatments. We all know that. Any summary of history will tell you that that's the case. But again, I go back to my original statement that it's not a race problem, it's a God problem. And we as Christians should have something to say about it. Because, for example, when someone says to us or pushes us to say, do Black Lives Matter? Our response should be very simple. Yes, Black Lives Matter, absolutely. But so does every life. Not to denigrate what's seen as racism or any type of prejudice, but to point out that yes, every life matters. Black Lives Matter. Not the organization that stands for things that are completely contrary to the teachings of the church, whether it's the destruction of the nuclear family or the exaltation of gender ideology, whatever it happens to be. But all lives matter. And that's not a denial of anything except a proclamation of the gospel, that every single life is created by God and is intended for something better than this life, is intended for heaven. And so Canon Hinnant's life mattered. George Floyd's life mattered. The thousands upon thousands of black babies who were killed in abortion matter. The children in the inner cities who have been killed because of gang violence matter. Every single life matters, and we as Christians, as Catholics, have to learn to stand up for that. And I'm not talking about, standing in a protest or anything like that, because we have something else to give. We have something else to offer. And what we have to offer is Jesus Christ. And all too often, I worry that we don't take that responsibility seriously. We don't have a race problem, we have a God problem, because those often who believe or say they believe in Christ don't do enough to spread his message of love and mercy. And we all have that responsibility. When we consider where our country is and what's been going on, it makes us wonder. Abraham Lincoln, in one of his addresses to Congress, said that the last best hope for the earth was the American experiment. I don't know if he could say that today. We're losing the soul of our society on so many levels, and it really does break my heart. Because as a people, we have the capacity to do wonderful things. We are a generous people. We are a people who always seek to help the downtrodden, those who are suffering. And yet, in so many ways, we've lost our humanity. And obviously, the last several months of the pandemic have not helped. It's hard to engage in personal interaction when most of the people you come in contact with look like bandits or bank robbers, right? And while that might be necessary on some level, it does hinder our capacity to speak on a human level. Isolation seems to be the norm. Anger and division seems to be the norm. But we cannot allow that to be so, because we have a responsibility to share Jesus. Well, how do we do that? Well, for some, I was on a phone conversation the other day with a friend of a friend, a young man who is an evangelical, and we were talking, and he said he and his friends had gone out to eat, and when they came out, they saw a homeless man, and he felt very convicted to go over and share the gospel with him. And they did. They went and had a conversation, and he was talking to me a little bit about that experience. And the reality is that's wonderful, but it's not necessary all the time. There are other ways we can do that, because most of us are not comfortable just walking up to somebody and spreading the gospel. But if we are worthy of the name of Christ, we can share Jesus. And how do we do that? Seeing the humanity in another person, not being afraid to say, "Can I pray for you?" When you go to the grocery store and you're standing in the checkout line and the cashier is running your groceries through, don't be afraid to say, "How are you? Is there something that I can pray for you? Is there an intention that is on your heart right now?" Or to do that to someone in the office. I know that can be dangerous depending on where you work. But not to be afraid to share Jesus. It's the only thing that's going to change the society. The best antidote to the ills that plague our society is the message of Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, and the one that came into the world to give us life in abundance and to show us the way to the Father. And I think all of the discord, all of the anger, all of the division, all of the violence, the death of so many, including little Cannon, will be for naught if we, as followers of Jesus Christ, don't seek to change the world in which we live, one person at a time, one offer of prayer at a time, one willingness to share the love of Jesus each day. Jesus has given us so much. He sacrificed everything so that we could be strong, so that we could build the kingdom, so that we can be his instruments in this life and prepare others for the life to come. That's who we are called to be. Don't neglect that primary responsibility. Don't be afraid every day to look for an opportunity to pray for someone, to speak to someone about Jesus, and to remind the world that there is a better way. There is a better way. And regardless of the chaos that we see going on around us, regardless of the struggles we experience, realize that we are not alone. That the Lord continues to be with us. He continues to lead us and guide us. But if we want to change the world, we first have to allow the Lord to change us. To be changed through the sacraments, to be changed through prayer, and to be convicted by the power of Jesus Christ to share the Lord with others. Don't be afraid. There's too much fear. There's too much anxiety. If we honestly seek to do the will of the Lord, there is nothing we have to fear because we are made for heaven. Let's start living that way. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.